Happy Friday, Innovation Challenge Hackathon hackers. Thank you for taking the time to join us today. And Ailsa, thank you for taking the time to talk to us today. I'm here with Ailsa Leen, she works in the Azure engineering organization, and she is focused on design and specifically accessibility. And so she's going to share some of what she presented at Build just last week. And feel free to put questions in the chat. And I hope, let me just turn it over to you.
Great, yeah.
So, when these people are trying to make a recommendation system more accessible, what's your advice?
Yeah, well, thanks for having me, Matthew. I'm really excited to be speaking to you all. Like Matthew said, my job is focused on accessibility. So it's kind of two parts. One is I make sure our developer platforms for building with AI are accessible so that developers with disabilities can build with AI and join hackathons just like all of you, some of which, maybe you as well. And then the other part is kind of jobs like this and talking about how AI can be used to benefit accessibility and kind of, encouraging folks to think about using Azure AI in these ways. So I can start the talk. We're going to keep it chill and Friday morning casual. So Matthew, you can act as our audience proxy and jump in with any questions as we go. And yeah, I'll just kind of start with explaining accessibility in a little bit more detail before getting into the AI stuff.
Yeah, and and just to the point of making our developer tools accessible.
Mm-hmm.
Visual Studio has always been really good at building in accessibility features. I know there's more in there than I'm even aware of. And so I think that I just want to, tip of the hat to the work that you and your team have been doing for years to make us leaders in that space.
Thanks, Matthew. Well, that's definitely not me, but I agree that, Visual Studio, I'm not a developer myself, but I know Visual Studio has done a lot of work, VS Code, all of the rest of the development tools. Being a dev is a great career, right? So it's important that that's inclusive for everyone. And a lot of the kind of accessibility features they build into those tools are inclusive for everyone. Like think about how adjustable all of the different code and, kind of display and color settings are in Visual Studio and all of our other tools. Like that's really useful for people with, different visual conditions, whether it's being colorblind, so like preferring a different kind of type of color in their, display or, light sensitive and things like that. So yeah, totally true. So I'm going to talk about accessibility just a little bit to start us off. So, some of you may already be familiar with this, but this is how we talk about accessibility at Microsoft. Firstly, what is accessibility? It's really about making sure that everything that we build and design, and, at Microsoft, that's digital products, but it can also be, services like government services, the built environment, right? Like buildings and, hospitals and things like that. They all need to be accessible to people with disabilities, right? These are all the things that, make up a fulfilling life and over 1.3 billion people in the world have disabilities, and many of those benefit from assistive technology. When we talk about disability, though, we often kind of talk about folks with permanent disabilities, right? So that might be somebody who is blind or who is deaf or hard of hearing, and that's a long-term condition. And we also, at Microsoft, when we consider designing our products, consider that many of us in our lives will experience temporary or situational disabilities. So by temporary, I mean, that might be actually, for me at the moment, I have a pretty blocked ear on the left side. And I don't think it's anything long term, but I need to get that cleared out. And that's something temporarily that's impairing my hearing. I hear much worse at the moment out of the left ear than the right, which is
I was talking to a fellow who he wound up, I think, injuring both of his hands
right.
A while back. And for him, it was this great opportunity to figure out how would I use Word? How would I get my job done? And it was a real eye opener for him too. So the temporary disability piece it's something to, that matters.
Yeah, absolutely. And voice is a great solution for some of the hand-based stuff. I feel like that can kind of be an opportunity for the person, to try out some of our voice technologies, which are AI-based, and we can talk about later, that might, help them be more efficient in the long term, right?
Yeah.
And then the other one is situational. And so that would that's slightly different to temporary disability. That would be something like, if we kind of extend the hearing example that I was using, if you're in a really noisy bar or a noisy environment, it can be difficult to hear what's happening. And that's a situational disability or situational impairment. So that's kind of the spectrum. And then when we think about, designing for and including people all across that spectrum, not just permanent disabilities, it really makes our experiences more inclusive for everyone and just that little bit more sort of flexible and accommodating and easier to use. So I have this picture on the screen of what they call in America a curb cut. Matthew, are you familiar with these, and have you taken advantage of these for any reason at any point?
I'm familiar with them. I've not. I don't know if I've knowingly, consciously taken advantage of them.
Oh, okay, interesting. Well, okay, so what we have up here called curb cuts. These are the basically little ramps that are built into the sidewalk that are really, really important for people with wheelchairs to navigate our streets safely, right? Because otherwise if someone with the wheelchair doesn't have a ramp, they can't cross the street and go safely from the sidewalk onto the road and then back up again, right? So these are really, really important for people who have a permanent mobility disability. But I can bet that you've probably used one at some point, Matthew, because if you have ever tried to navigate the sidewalk with a wheelie suitcase or maybe even a stroller, or for me, sometimes a bicycle if I'm walking along, they are incredibly useful, especially if you have a heavy suitcase, not to have to lift that up and kind of pull it along. So curb cuts are a great example of something I think most people really who use the sidewalk use at some point or another. I have a couple more kind of technical examples here. These are all experiences, and because I work on the AI team, these are all AI-powered experiences for more or less that make things just that little bit more inclusive and accommodating for people who use our Microsoft software. And many of them are crucial accessibility tools for people who have disabilities. So one example here is in Teams. We've had live captions for a while, and those captions now have translation, which is really cool too. But captions are so important for our deaf colleagues here at Microsoft and any other company that uses Microsoft, so that people can follow along and actually participate in our meetings and conversations. But they are a feature that we know many people benefit from who aren't necessarily deaf or hard of hearing. When I did this talk at Build last week, our VP of Azure AI Services, Marco, was talking about this with me on stage, and he is not deaf himself, but he uses captions almost every day in his meetings because he just finds it lowers the cognitive load to follow along in a meeting and have the captions while he's also engaged in the conversation. So that's one example. In Office, we've had dictation for a long time. So that's that voice-enabled version if you'd prefer to put your information in via voice. We have these lovely read aloud features in most of Microsoft products, whether it's Edge and Office, that can read everything out to you on the screen. And there's much more. And Copilot, which I will talk about in a little bit. Copilot wasn't a product that was designed explicitly for people with disabilities, but it's something we found, all of the assistive capabilities that come with Copilot has been, an incredible productivity boost for people with disabilities too. So I'm going to jump into a few examples actually now. So for the first one, actually, I could have done this earlier, but I will fire up live captions. So I talked about captions in Teams, but we also have captions in Windows, and I hope this isn't too small. I did change the setting to make them larger just before this call, but it looks like it reverted. Oh, it should be large text. Okay, so let me turn on microphone audio. And now that I start talking, the live caption should automatically pick me up. And this is a really useful tool for folks who aren't necessarily using Teams. Maybe you have to use Zoom for work, or you're watching a video on the internet which hasn't been captioned, because sometimes unfortunately that happens. Now we have AI powered speech to text transcription live captions in Windows. I'm getting distracted by my own captions now. I'm going to turn that off, but that's an incredible accessibility tool that is AI powered, that's been in Windows since Windows 11. That's a great stopgap for people where captions are missing in other products.
I did not know about that one.
Yeah, and it's free, right? If you have Windows 11.
Just part of Windows.
Yeah. So we provide a lot of our accessibility tools that way. So then one other one that I'll show while we're here is read aloud. And the browser up here is probably really small for folks who are following along, but we have this button up here with an A and sort of a few lines coming out of it, and that's called Read Aloud. That's in Office and also in Edge, where if you're reading this blog about accessibility that our Chief Accessibility Officer wrote, you can hit. I'm not sharing audio, am I, Matthew?
No, do you want to redo it? Do you want to
Yeah,
change?
I'll redo it right now.
I won't talk so we don't get the echo.
Yeah, perfect. So here. And if I hit that read aloud button,
Us a month of accessibility innovation. May 30th, 2024, Jenny Laflery, Microsoft.
So yeah, you get the idea, just that little demo. Those are, you know, quite natural, nice voices now. With our text-to-speech capabilities in Azure, they're a lot more natural than the sort of robotic computer voices that people might be used to hearing. You know, we've moved far past that, and there are a ton of different voice options available. I can choose my reading speed, and I can choose between all of these different voices, including voices in different languages. This is kind of a fun demo if I play Eloise. Seems like
Microsoft Chief Accessibility Officer. New dismount.
So, and kind of a silly demo, because obviously, you know, who wants to specifically hear someone speaking English in a French accent? But, you know, obviously if I had a French page here, you know, they'd have a proper voice that sounds French reading the content. You know, we have childlike voices and adult voices, and, you know, many different things that you can set here. And there are features within Azure where folks can train, you know, brands or companies can train their own custom voices as well. So yeah, that's read aloud. I think the next thing I was going to show while I have video, and then I'll let you chime in again if you want, Matthew. I know you're being very careful not to cause an echo, is the Copilot example. So I have a video here that is folks from across Microsoft who have disabilities talking about how Copilot has benefited them. So I'll play that.
AI has a massive opportunity to
Is it working? Did it pause?
The video paused.
to help people with disabilities like me. I'm going to show you some of my favorite features that help improve my productivity on a daily basis.
Jeremy Curry. And I'll just go into Copilot and say, summarize this email. Christina Mallon.
I'm able to really use my voice through the microphone and voice access that's built into Copilot. They say, tell me the changes in accessibility for the past month. I'm going to launch Word.
Describe what you'd like to write, including notes or an outline, and Copilot can generate a draft to help you get started.
In this case, I'm going to ask it to write about the history of computer science.
History of computer science. Generate.
A draft.
One of the things that is challenging when you have dyslexia is writing. So to help with that, I will ask Copilot to write a draft email. I'm going to ask it to still keep my tone because I want it to sound like me, and I want it to be short, asking Mary to do a pre-read of the document.
Entering a prompt.
And is now generating a template email, which is short and sweet, which is a brilliant productivity enhancement for me.
When I think about generative AI, I think about things that I've done in my 20+ year career in accessibility that we've not been able to do before now. And some of these things are literally life-changing.
This process without Copilot usually takes an hour, but this took 3 minutes. It's important to give me the time back to work on the things that I love. And generative AI does that.
If you want to make AI more accessible and better for you, use it and provide feedback. I'm excited about the possibility that it will help bridge the disability divide.
Microsoft.
So yeah, let me switch back to no audio. That
actually is a.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, yeah, that's a good example because at Microsoft, this event, the Innovation Challenge, is about inclusion, diversity and inclusion among our community of developers out there building on our stuff, among our customers. But a lot of what has driven our commitment to this at Microsoft has been our commitment to our own people. These are some really brilliant people, and we want everyone to work really hard and commit a lot because it's Microsoft. But yeah, it's like we need to find the best people in the world, and and if they need a little extra help to make working with us easier, we focus on that.
Yeah,
that's
exactly. Because,
yeah.
the reality is like lots of, for people with disabilities, like, thinking about Christina, who was the woman sitting in the chair, she uses her computer with her feet because she can't use her arms. Like things
Yeah.
are just going to take a lot longer because computers were not really designed for that, right?
Yeah.
People didn't think about these things when they designed most laptop computers. So things take longer for her. That's just loads of lost, like you said, lost potential for Microsoft, right, as a company, and for her. She, probably has what we call the disability tax. It takes longer to get things done than someone who's able to use their hands to work with the computer. So, Copilot makes all of us more efficient, but it really unlocks the potential of our, colleagues with disabilities or other folks in the disability community who get to use some of these tools.
If I can interrupt again, you talked about, the disability tax and things taking longer. Measuring how long things take is a great engineering metric.
Mm-hmm.
And just a tip for the hackers out there: if your hack focuses on doing something faster, that's kind of a good thing to focus on. Very measurable, very focused, and I'll just kind of leave that at that.
Nice,
so,
good food for thought.
Yeah.
So like I guess I sort of showed a couple of different examples and kind of talked about accessibility, but I want to kind of step back and think about what does the era of AI mean for accessibility, because it is a very exciting time. There's 2 points that I have. So the first one is what AI is really doing is it's making accessibility at scale easier than ever. And so we have what's amazing about the AIs of today is they're multimodal, right? You can describe images or understand images. You can bring voice to things or turn voice into text, right? Like some of the examples that we showed. And these really address kind of what we call mismatches or gaps between someone who's deaf. They just can't take in sound, but they can, if that gap is bridged for them, they can interact with the world like perfectly. So what AI is really doing is bridging those gaps, and it's doing it at a scale that it can be hard to provide without AI. So one example I have on this screen is a picture of the USA Today app. They use our text-to-speech tools to have all of their articles automatically read out loud, just like we showed in Microsoft Edge right now, in a natural voice. So that's a feature in their mobile app. And think about how many, articles USA Today produces per day, right? It's not really feasible for them unless they created like a whole other, team of narrators and funded that to provide that kind of inclusive capability where people can choose to either read or listen. It would be a whole other initiative for them to start that up. But with AI, much more cheaply, they're able to basically provide a service they wouldn't otherwise and bridge that gap and help people who just prefer voice and add that experience. It's the same with captioning, right? With Windows, we're able to bridge the gap for any audio, transcribe that. And it's the same with image description, So I think what we can see, and that's easy. That's one of the things that I have in this slide, as simple as an API call. At this point, there's kind of no excuse for adding multimodal experiences into, engaging user experiences, right? Like, why not add voice just so that people have the option of hearing things rather than reading them? Why not describe things? So there's a lot of things you can do there, and AI is really enabling that scale. The second point,
you just made me think of a tip for the hackers too. One of the open data sets that Microsoft makes available to play with is the MSN News recommendation system, where you can go through and look at interactions, clicks, views, etc., that we get from headlines. Another thing that hackers can play with.
Cool. That's great.
Yeah.
And then my second point about why, this era of generative AI is such a big deal for accessibility is the natural language component, right? And we kind of hinted at that when we saw the Copilot video. What LLMs are bringing to us, or, multimodal models, is natural language assistance. And, Copilot is an assistive technology, right? It's a mainstream assistive technology compared to something like a screen reader that is focused on the blind community. Copilot is an assistive technology for everyone. And I think when assistive tools are mainstream, that's much better for people with disabilities too, because they generally get more funding, they get more attention because they're for a larger market. What Copilot can do is, it helps you summarize, it helps you edit, it helps you generate content. If you're someone with dyslexia, for example, having that summarization ability and able to, rephrase written content into something that might be easier for you to read is an incredible tool. And so, all of these things can make life, again, easier for everyone, but especially people with disabilities. And what I think we're really getting with natural language is the ability for everyone to individually personalize and adapt to their own needs, right? So if it's someone with dyslexia, their own need will be around reading. But it's really about being able to use that natural language to make like the assistive tool that you want. So I think that's really exciting, and especially because of how mainstream it's going to be. I would say ultimately anything to do with natural language is kind of an accessibility tool for all of us.
Yeah, Satya loves to say that it's the easiest programming interface ever. Yeah,
exactly. Yeah, so that's really exciting. I think really those are the two main. Oh, I have a couple of other examples here of innovation. So this is an app called Seeing AI, and it was share again with audio, and then kind of contextualize what we're about to show. So this is a product that was created quite some years ago now by a blind engineer on the Microsoft team through a hackathon project, and it's now his full-time job, and it has been for over 5 years or so. And it's an app called Seeing AI for the blind and low vision community to basically describe the world around you via a mobile app. And we've and this has been available for a while with the computer vision technologies of 5 some years ago, and now with GPT-4 visual, and GPT-4o is coming or is here, but this is showing GPT-4. There's some really cool kind of conversational abilities that blind users of Seeing AI can now use to learn more. So I think the most interesting one is the one on the right, which is around using Seeing AI to understand a menu. And I think it really shows how conversational UI is, and that kind of multimodal language plus vision is so much more useful than just vision. So here we go.
After scanning this menu and Seeing AI, what are the categories?
The categories in the document are antipasti, salads, pizza, with subcategories red and white, specials, and dessert.
What antipasti dishes are there?
There are 3 antipasti dishes mentioned in the document. 1. Oven roasted asparagus with paprika aioli, red onion, tomatoes, arugula, and lemon zest. 2. Polenta with marinara sauce, granarino, homemade meatballs, and herbs. 3. Oven roasted castelvetrano olives marinated with chilies, garlic, and lemon.
How much does the asparagus antipasti cost?
The asparagus antipasti costs $12.
Basically, what's cool about that video for me is, it's one thing to use computer vision and use OCR to just read out an entire menu to someone who's blind, right? Like, here's all the text in this image. But what's so much more useful, and how sighted people interact with written content too, is being able to see what sections are there. If I'm really into antipasti, can you tell me more about that? Or like, tell me if something on this menu has cheese, because I really love cheese and I feel like cheese today. It's just a much more intuitive way to interpret your visual surroundings, being able to ask questions about it. So another cool example that I have. What else do I have? I see that we're running out of time. So 5 minutes. What am I going to show us today? Let me just see what else is in my little example briefcase. But any thoughts or questions, Matthew?
I guess one thing that I always kind of come back to with accessibility is that good accessibility is generally good usability.
Yeah, absolutely.
It requires that you really think through, how are people interacting with your system, and how do you make that better? And it gets you thinking in these really interesting ways that make me more creative when I try to think that way. I mean, I'm trying to think of, like, for people that like are presented with a wine list that's only in French, and it's only French wines, and they don't know the difference between something from one village and another. It's not really accessibility, but like, how do you interact with that if you don't have a map of France and the weather report and everything that goes into it? Maybe not a good example, but
yeah,
I'll just stop with good accessibility is good usability.
Yeah, if there's a gap, how do you make it easier for people? And I think basically designing for the needs of accessibility is kind of helping us think a little bit more creatively, right? Like, if you design sometimes we talk about, if you design for folks at the edges, who are more underrepresented, you design a solution that better fits the majority. So this is just a slide with examples. I mean, I kind of tore you through a load of different things today, and there wasn't time to cover everything, but this is just showing, kind of a summary slide of some more examples of, a use case that can benefit accessibility, who it benefits, and the technologies, of course, that underpin some of this. And when I presented this at Build, we also talked about what customers already use these, because there are lots of people already using these at scale, right? We build these things into our products, such as live captions, and then we show that it can be done at the scale of Windows. Then folks like Peloton and Swedish Television are more encouraged to also put it into their own products.
How I guess I'll just have kind of one last question for you.
Mm-hmm.
We encourage people to, if you're for example, if you're focused on adding accessibility features to an app,
mm-hmm.
You need to engage people that need that feature.
Yeah, that's
need that gap bridged. How do we find those people? How do we test with those folks? How do you gather requirements when they're not your requirements?
Yeah, that's such a good point, and I'm so glad that you brought it up, Matthew. So in the disability community, there's a well-known slogan or mantra called "Nothing about us without us," and that is absolutely the case. If you're gonna, and there are so many well-meaning people in the world, right? Especially when they're hacking and things, trying to come up with an innovative solution to a problem, they might come up with a solution to a problem that they don't necessarily know about. They want to help. There are so many barriers for the disability community. A hacker might want to help. But if they aren't grounded in the needs of, let's say, the deaf community, they're likely to make, and we all are likely to make, assumptions about what deaf people might or might not need, or what deaf people might be able to do, and that can sometimes be harmful, right? If you make an assumption, let's say for the blind example, that blind people need help with everything, whereas in reality they're actually fairly independent and they only need help with interpreting visual surroundings. So sometimes making those assumptions and building them into the product can be, offensive to people, or it can be wasting time building a solution that isn't necessary. So it's so important. Sign language is another example, right? There's a lot of folks working on sign language AI. Sometimes the computer scientists who work on that, and they see it just as we've had folks who've seen it as just created a solution around sign language gloves, for example, right? Mm-hmm. Because sign language is used primarily, a lot of sign language is done with hands, but it's also facial expression. So, if you didn't learn much about sign language and thought that the problem was only, to do with detecting hand movements, you'd be missing a huge part of the problem. And a lot of this can be solved by talking to people from that community. And you asked me how, rather than why. So I guess what I have on the slide is a little bit more geared towards, folks working in organizations, because it's what I showed at Build. I talked about how, if you've got, if you work in a large organization, there are often employee resource groups, or, if you have a product in market, there are customer feedback channels that you can use. What I said in Build was, you probably have more customers with disabilities than you realize. Make sure your feedback channels are accessible so they can give you feedback, and make sure you're looking for that feedback. Those things aren't necessarily the case, of course, if you're working on a hackathon. I would really encourage. Were you going to say something, Matthew, or shall I keep?
No, keep going. You're more important than me here.
Yeah, I mean, definitely the best case is working on a hack with a hack teammate who has lived experience in the problem you're solving, right? You're just going to have a much deeper grounding in any problem by doing that. The other thing is reaching out online or posting about your work. I would say in the context of a hack, probably the most realistic thing in the time frame is to spend time on places where your community might gather, right? If it's like Reddit, sometimes there are forums for people just talking about their experiences, in a particular disability group, and that'll be really wide ranging and not just focus on tech solutions as well. So it's a great way to learn, really more context of the lived experience. I would say social forums, places where people are talking on the internet about kind of these sort of problems are a great place to spend time and learn. It's probably the most realistic thing in the context of the hack. And, you can even ask questions in some of these groups. I would say, take care when you do things like that. If there's a group online, let's say in Reddit, that is specifically for people who are neurodivergent to share and exchange with each other, that could be more of a listening space rather than somewhere to come in and say you've come up with a solution for this group that you're not part of. So I think just kind of using good judgment, but really trying to consciously lean into learning from others and not assuming that your hack solves the problem that you think it is if you're not from that group. But it's not to put anyone off any of this. I think it's just thinking about taking that time to learn and kind of test your assumptions as you build.
I think and this might be bad advice, but another source of information. A lot of times when I'm doing sort of like competitive analysis or looking for how to improve a certain type of software, I'll do a search on, especially someplace with lots of customer reviews, for product name X sucks for blind people or something like that.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah.
Find where people are complaining and find what they're complaining about and go solve those problems.
Yeah.
Those are the opportunities.
Yeah, just learn what people have to say online, right? There's a lot of information online about what any given person or community thinks about something. So yeah.
And you mentioned Reddit, which made me think of complaining. So
yeah, relation.
Ailsa, thank you so much for your time today. And I look forward to talking again. We'll have to find another reason to do this.
I look forward to hearing what everyone comes up with, especially for the personalization and accessibility challenge. So
cool. Thanks so much.
Thank you.